The most cruel millionaire in the country froze when he saw the photo in the pocket of the new cook. He was Nigeria's most ruthless millionaire, a man who brooked no delays, accepted no excuses, and lived alone, hiding a trauma that turned him to stone. Everyone feared him. No one dared look him in the eye. But one ordinary night, fate placed a simple village cleaner with timid steps and a weary look in his mansion. And when an old photo fell from her pocket, this man's world stopped. Because within that image lay the secret that could shatter his coldness and rekindle a love he swore he'd buried forever. Obi Adeyemi was the kind of man who made the entire city hold its breath whenever his name was mentioned. At 42, he had built an empire that spanned many industries: oil, construction, and luxury real estate. But what most captured attention wasn't the extent of his wealth, but the way he acquired it, with steady hands, quick decisions, and a heart that seemed incapable of wavering. In Lagos, many simply called him the millionaire executioner, not because he was physically violent, but because his intolerance for mistakes was legendary. No delay was forgiven. No apology was sufficient. An employee who was 2 minutes late for a meeting wasn't given a warning. They were sent packing. A supplier who delivered merchandise with even a minor flaw would never do business with him again. Obi believed that perfection was the only acceptable path, and anyone who didn't keep up with him was doomed to be discarded. His mansion in Ikoyi was a reflection of his personality. A modern palace with straight lines and enormous windows where everything seemed calculated to convey power and order. The garden was trimmed as if every blade had been measured with a ruler. The marble floor shone like a mirror, the result of hours of work by the servants who silently glided through the corridors, afraid of being noticed. There was no laughter, no loud conversation, only measured footsteps, shallow breaths, and the shadow of a boss who appeared without warning. Obi was unmarried. He had no children, no close friends. His dinners were solitary, served at a table too long for a single man. The clink of silverware against porcelain echoed through the empty room, mingling with the distant sounds of the city. Some said he preferred it this way, that solitude was the only companion compatible with his obsession with control. Others believed there was something more, a hidden past, a wound that explained his refusal to form bonds. The mansion staff knew that any mistake could be the last. A poorly folded tablecloth, a misplaced glass, a dish served a minute late. Everything was grounds for a sharp reprimand or immediate dismissal. "There's no room for excuses here," he would say in a low tone, but with a firmness that chilled the blood of anyone who heard him. No one dared look him in the eye. When he appeared in the main hall, impeccably suited and unwaveringly expressive, the servants lowered their eyes. The silence grew even heavier, as if even the walls were afraid of displeasing him. Some younger workers would often ask why everyone called him executioner. A few days in the mansion were enough for them to understand. A driver once tried to explain himself after a traffic delay. Obi just stared at him for a few seconds, silent. The man was sweating, trying to explain. Obi raised his hand, interrupting, "Do you think my agenda is less important than your problems?" The driver stammered an apology, but it was no use. The next day, another man took his place behind the wheel. This was Obi Adeyemi, a man who brooked no failure, who saw discipline as the only acceptable language. And behind the high walls of his mansion, he lived like this, solitary, surrounded by servants who dared not meet his gaze, building every day the image of a ruthless millionaire. For many, it was a picture of victory. For those who lived nearby, it was a picture of fear. If this story has already captivated you with its portrayal of this ruthless man, just imagine what's yet to come. Click subscribe now and don't miss a single detail of what's to come. But Obi wasn't always like this. At 15, he still had an easy laugh and an open heart. In the dusty schoolyard, in the shade of a mango tree that spilled leaves onto the concrete benches, he and the girl he loved swore what, for two teenagers, seemed eternal. Their hands trembled, a strand of thread wrapped around her finger like a makeshift ring. "If life changes, you promise?" she whispered. "I promise," he replied, certain that nothing could tear them away from that dreamed-of future. The promise didn't last until Wednesday night. The phone rang urgently out of hours. A neighbor knocking on the gate, voices hurried. The father, the family's breadwinner, had been in a serious accident on the road. There was no time for goodbyes. In the cold hospital corridor, the news collapsed. On them, like a poorly supported ceiling, Obi's mother stood speechless, staring at a spot on the floor as if she could stitch reality back together. His younger sister cried, unable to understand why everyone was hugging her so tightly. The house, once simple and stable, became a battleground against overdue bills, medicines, and school notebooks. The silence of the nights became filled with the dull thud of worry. Obi, at 15, discovered the weight of being the man of the house without ever having asked for that title. He woke before dawn to help his mother, returning from school with a heavy backpack and an even heavier head. On his face, the features of a boy. On his shoulders, the burden of an adult. That's when Aunt Bina called. Her voice was firm, matter-of-fact, and without room for complaint. She offered a job and, in exchange, would pay for a prep course at the best school in town. There were, however, non-negotiable conditions: an immediate move to another city, a strict routine and timed work and study hours. "You start on Monday, there's no room for delay here, understand?" she said. Obi looked at his mother, looked at his sister, swallowed the lump in his throat. I understood. That early morning he packed his backpack in silence. He set aside 2 t-shirts, a notebook, and a pair of worn-out shoes. He wrote and deleted messages he would never send. His childhood sweetheart slept on the other side of the city, unaware that he would be gone before dawn. "If I stay, I'm failing my mother. If I take you, I'm failing you," he thought, staring at the ceiling. He decided to leave without saying goodbye. He didn't want promises he couldn't keep, nor tears that would hold him back when he needed to be strong. He believed deep in his aching chest that leaving her was a twisted way of protecting her. The bus left, still dark, the cold glass pressed against his forehead, the smell of diesel wafting through the poorly sealed window. Outside, the lights grew dim, as if the city were shrinking to fit inside a memory. Obi repeated, as if praying, work, study, support the family. With every kilometer, he felt the thread connecting him to his own childhood snap. When the sun came out, he was no longer just a 15-year-old student. He was the eldest son, the responsible brother, the one who can do no wrong. In his new city, everything demanded precision. Aunt Bina waited for him with a ready-made schedule. Work in the morning, prep. School in the afternoon, more work in the evening. "No delays," she repeated. Obi learned to measure time in minutes, to plan his route so as not to depend on chance, to double-check what others would check once. When his body needed rest, he remembered his mother folding clothes late into the night, his sister studying by the dim kitchen light. And he continued. Memories of school and the mango tree returned in fits and starts, like photographs someone forgot to burn. The smell of rain, the sound of laughter at the gates of another school was enough to make his chest ache. In rare intervals, he would pick up his cell phone and stare at her contact, the name that still lit everything inside him. He didn't call. Silence was the choice he'd made the night of the accident. "One day I'll return with dignity," he promised himself. "One day I'll return without asking for anything." If anyone had seen him during that period, they would have seen only a silent and determined boy. What no one saw was the effort to keep the invisible promise, to provide for the household, not to fail, not to give in. With each bill paid, a piece of the boy was left behind. With each day, without delay, the rope that bound his emotions was pulled another knot. Life didn't ask permission. It entered and rearranged his internal furniture. And in the soft place where lightness lived, discipline began to dwell. "It'll work out," his mother said on the phone, one night when he was overcome by longing. "It will," he replied, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I promise." Promises, he learned early, aren't just words spoken under a mango tree. Sometimes they're silent choices, repeated day after day, until the heart learns to beat in time with responsibility. This is how trauma shaped Obi, not with shouts but with a succession of small yeses to duty and small no's to himself. And from then on, anything out of place, a delay, a mistake, an excuse, felt to him like a threat to the only structure that kept him from falling apart. If this part of the story has already moved you, prove it to me now. Write the word destiny in the comments. I want to see how many believe that difficult choices can change everything. Obi dove into his work like someone jumping into a river without checking its depth. He woke up before the first bus, ate bread with tea in a hurry, and crossed Lagos watching the city light up. During the day, spreadsheets, phone calls, budgets. At night, notes. In a black-covered notebook, contacts, deadlines, debts to collect, weekly goals. The guilt and pain, which he didn't show to anyone, became fuel. No excuses. he repeated to himself, as he learned to negotiate cement prices, delivery times, and the risk of rain on the construction sites. It started small, a narrow warehouse, 2 shelves, a phone that barely stopped ringing. He carried bags himself, checked invoices, and made deliveries when the driver was absent. There was no room for luck. There was method. Each customer was treated as if they were the only one. Each delay became an alternative route. Gradually, orders grew. One contractor recommended another. The warehouse grew larger. The generator's roar became victory music. The smell of gravel dust clung to the skin like a battle scar. At 20, he brought his mother closer. He rented a simple apartment in Surulere, painted the walls with his own hands, bought a second-hand table and a stove that lit on the 3rd try. He took her to the doctor, organized medicines in a transparent box and stocked the refrigerator. At night, he would sit on the couch and listen to her stories, letting her mother's voice sow through the fringes of his exhaustion. "You're very thin, Obi," she said, squeezing his hand. "It's just the rush, Mom. It'll be worth it." At 23, the boy had become a hallmark at meetings. His suit was tailored, his watch ticking contracts, his signature firm. The older partners watched him with a mixture of respect and caution. He didn't miss deadlines, he didn't settle for almosts. Nothing took up as much space in his agenda as goals. In his heart, however, there was a missing piece that work couldn't fill. That's when he decided to attempt a return to the past. He hit the road on a Saturday, window open, the red dust of the harmattan streaking the horizon. He just wanted a conversation. "Are you okay?" A reckoning with the boy who promised eternal love under the school mango tree. Arriving in the small town, he walked through the streets as if flipping through a photo album. The iron gate still creaked. The cafeteria still sold puff-puffs. The court had the same cracks. He ran into an old friend near the field. "You're back?" The friend smiled, surprised. "I need to talk to her. Where is she?" The smile faded. The man looked down and kicked a rock. "She moved a long time ago. No address, no message. No one knows." The news hit him like a wet brick. Obi sat on the bench, ran his hands over his face, and tried to organize his thoughts. The wind stirred the mango leaves just like the day they swore they would never abandon each other. "It's late," he thought, feeling the weight of his choices. He stood there for a few minutes, staring into space, until the clock reminded him of who he had become, a man of schedules and deliverables. From then on, prosperity was his answer to everything. He grew bigger, secured bigger contracts, and opened branches. And, at the same time, he built an invisible wall between himself and any possibility of attachment. Relationships became dinners without dessert, flowers without a note, rides to the corner. He changed companions, like one changes ties, clean, polite, but without promises. "Won't you call tomorrow?" someone asked. "I have an early meeting," he said, in the same neutral voice as someone reading a report. To outsiders, Obi was the cold man who preferred contracts to feelings, a success story chronicled in business magazines. To those who worked with him, he was the boss who was never late and brooked no delay. And yet, in the early mornings when the silence seemed too great, there was a name that insisted on piercing his memory. It wasn't cheap nostalgia, it was a scar. He continued to win line by line, project by project, but behind the smoked glass doors and impeccable reports, his heart held the same unanswered question: where is it? And why, despite everything, did it still ache? The mansion's dining room, set up like a showcase, displayed napkins folded in the shape of lilies, cutlery lined 2 fingers from the edge, and glasses that glinted beneath the chandelier. Scents of cardamom and browned butter wafted through the air as the foreign investors took their seats, chuckling softly, exchanging phrases in restrained English. Obi Adeyemi observed everything like a conductor who tolerates not a note out of time. The first round of dishes was enough for silence to descend. Filet arrived cold, the garnish dished up. At the head of the table, a glass was missing, a visible void on the linen tablecloth. That was enough. Obi didn't raise his voice. He called the butler with a brief gesture. "There's no room for error here," he said softly. "Correct it." The tremor in the man's hand betrayed the disaster. A second slip, misplacing the cutlery in the wrong place, sealed the team's fate. The investors glanced at each other. One of them cleared his throat. The wall clock ticked a minute too long. At the end of dinner, as the guests were ushered into the foyer, Obi stood, hands behind his back, expressionless. "Gather everyone in the kitchen," he ordered. The tile reflected a cold light as the employees filed in, aprons crumpled, eyes downcast. Obi scanned the row, unhurried, as if assessing an inventory. "Tonight cost me credibility. I don't buy excuses," he said slowly. "You're all dismissed." No one answered. Only the dull click of the clock could be heard. And in the background, the freezer compressor. A heavy silence spread through the hallways like smoke. The service door slammed shut 2, 3, 4 times until the kitchen was empty. In the office, among black folders and a window overlooking the garden, Obi picked up the phone. "Remy, I need a new team. Morning interviews here, no delays," he told the aide. "Yes, sir. Profile? People who don't make mistakes. That's all." The next morning, the smaller room next to the library became a triage room. Plastic chairs, a pitcher of water, spreadsheets. Outside, the gate greeted women in worn flip-flops and others in tight shoes, all with eyes that mixed hope and weariness. Among them was a Beek Nwosu, thin with sun-streaked skin, and a simple, impeccably clean dress. She carried a worn, peeling leather bag and a manila envelope with 2 handwritten references. Orphaned by both parents, she had learned early not to waste opportunities. She kept her chin up, even when the world pulled her down. Remy conducted the interviews with the haste of someone who had 10 other tasks behind. "Name, experience, availability," he repeated, barely looking up from the form. When Abik sat down, he adjusted the envelope on his lap and replied without embellishment, "Hotel laundry in Abeokuta 2 years, homestay in Ibadan a year and a half. I know how to handle products, schedules, and I learn quickly. When can you start?" "Today." The advisor looked up for the first time. He saw firmness where he expected fear. "The boss is demanding," he warned. "There's no such thing as delays." I understood. In the anteroom, the ceiling fan spun, pushing warm air. Abik drank a glass of water in measured sips, as if measuring her thirst. She discreetly observed the gilded frame of a painting, the gleam of marble on the baseboard, the lint-free doormat. There was a logic of perfection there that intimidated. Still, she kept her hands still on her bag, her fingers intertwined to avoid betraying nervousness. At noon, Remy collected the cards and called out 4 names. "Selected for immediate start. Training with the housekeeper at 3 o'clock, he said dryly. Abik nodded. She thanked him with a curt nod. She had no money to celebrate, nor time for long phone calls. She put away the envelope, adjusted the hem of her dress, and pulled the elastic band in her hair to secure her bun. In the inside pocket of her purse, she kept her few important papers and a small, crumpled photograph, mementos that to her were worth more than jewelry. The mansion, which had been the scene of silent embarrassment the night before, resumed its rhythm with measured steps. The housekeeper, the only remaining member, called in to train the new staff, determined tasks in a firm voice. Areas, schedules, products, routes. "In this house, mistakes come at a high price," he warned, pointing to the labeled cabinets. "Be invisible, be precise." Abik walked down the hallway with a bucket, a rag, and a newly absorbed set of rules. He noticed how the sun streamed in through the high windows, making the dust dance before settling. He also noticed how the sound of footsteps echoed differently on the polished marble. Every detail felt like a test. He pressed his lips together, his eyes fixed on what needed to be done. He had learned, through his losses, that dignity resides in small gestures. The sparkling glass, the unwrinkled towel, the trash bin changed before it was full. At the end of her first shift, she sat for a minute in the laundry area and took a deep breath. Her heart was still pounding, not out of blind trust, but out of necessity. She had no idea who the man behind this house really was, or the weight of his name, which spurred contracts, headlines, and fears. For Abik, for now, there was only work to do and one place to hold on tightly, the strap of her worn bag, which, like her, had survived so much. The rest, she would discover later. If this scene has already captivated you, don't think twice. Press like now and let's go all the way together, the other employees whispered in the hallways as the lavender water evaporated from the buckets. "You can't make mistakes here," one said, barely moving her lips. "He fired the entire kitchen over one glass," another recalled, adjusting her apron. The nickname blew through the doors like a wind, the millionaire executioner. Abik swallowed hard. She wasn't there to make friends or prove anything to anyone. She needed the salary to support her 2 children and keep a roof over their heads. She adjusted the strap of her worn bag, tied her scarf tighter in her hair, and mentally noted the order of tasks like someone memorizing a prayer. Dust, baseboards, doorknobs, mirrors, floor. He worked in silence, measuring his pace so the echo on the marble wouldn't betray his presence. The cloth was folded in 4, the movement always in the same direction, his eyes alert to every fingerprint on the chrome. He avoided crossing paths with his boss out of instinct and prudence. He had no interest in getting to know him, nor was he curious about his fame. Powerful people often brought trouble. For a bike, it was enough to perform with excellence and return home on time with the right amount of money. From time to time, the air changed temperature. That was how Obi's passing was perceived. A subtle scent, leather and something metallic, preceded his firm footsteps. When he crossed the hall, the murmur faded, breaths became shallow, and even the clock seemed to tick lower. A bike kept her gaze on her work, her body hunched over the baseboard, as if the world fit only in the straight line she needed to keep dust-free. But she felt, on an afternoon of slanted light, that there were eyes on her. Obi watched from afar, from a high vantage point on the mezzanine, the quick hands that wrung the cloth without splattering, the precision with which she aligned the chairs down to the millimeter, the way she avoided touching the surfaces with her skin, always using a cloth between her hand and the object. There was a restrained agility there, an economy of gestures that caught his attention. From the back, her slim figure, her firm bun, the posture of someone accustomed to not taking up space. A distant memory brushed the surface of his mind, a sensation, not an image. Instinctively, he shook his head, as if shaking off a delusion. He set his jaw and continued. A bike, for her part, felt the skin on the back of her neck prick, that ancient warning that someone was monitoring her movements. She didn't turn around. She clutched the cloth tighter, breathed through her nose to contain her anxiety, and checked the already clean edge of the table with her fingertips. Concentrate, she told herself. One mistake could cost her her job. A dirty look could too. The trick was to be correct and invisible. She went to the cabinet, checked the labels, got the right product, tested the spray, away from the furniture to avoid leaving marks. Everything was procedure. In the pantry, 2 employees lowered their tone when she came in to change the water in the bucket. He just passed, one murmured, as if reporting a natural phenomenon. Better not cross paths, added the other. A bike nodded neutrally and left. He'd learned that in houses like these, words often weigh more heavily than the wet floor. Back in the hallway, she lined up pictures with the corner of the cloth, removed an invisible lint from the lampshade, and straightened a rug that sagged a centimeter to the left because of the door. Her body moved with the precision of someone who can't make mistakes. Her mind, however, held 2 small presences. Her children, waiting for her with their lunchboxes packed and their homework on the table. It was for them that she held her fear steady. For them that she tamed her hands so as not to tremble when a manager appeared at the door with a clipboard. Obi passed again, without speaking, without slowing his pace. The shine of his shoe streaked her peripheral vision. He paused for a second, long enough to notice the steady rhythm with which a beak polished the railing, her controlled breathing, the economy of movement that indicated training or necessity. Another pang of familiarity scratched at the back of his mind. Again, he dismissed it with an almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if dismissing an inconvenient thought. A beak continued, the bucket in her left hand, the rag in her right, her knee resting lightly on the floor to reach the corner of the baseboard. Neither curiosity nor anticipation. Work. Her boss's fear was a background noise she preferred not to hear. She knew of the fame, of the stories of dismissals for a misplaced cup, but she had learned that panic produces more mistakes than prudence. So she counted. 1, 2, 3 movements per surface. 1, 2, 3 steps per quadrant of floor. The method calmed her. When she reached the end of the hallway, she stood up slowly to avoid dizziness. She felt like someone feeling the breeze before the rain, someone watching her again. She didn't deviate from her plan. She picked up her clipboard, marked the next room, straightened her scarf, and continued. The job was urgent, excellence non-negotiable, and if there were eyes at the top of the stairs measuring her every move, then let her measure them. She couldn't afford to make a mistake, or to imagine that this man, as hard as the marble edges of the house, had once been part of her distant past. Would you dare work for a boss like that? Tell me yes or never down here. It was early, the light still streaming in through the wide windows when a beak knelt before the dark wood sideboard, the cloth folded in 4, her arm extended to where the dust always insists on hiding. As she leaned forward, the worn stitching on the inside pocket of her apron gave way with a barely audible snap. Obi walked down the hallway, mentally checking his calendar. The shine of the floor reflected the yellowed edge of the fallen photograph. The gesture was automatic. He bent down, fingers precise, and picked up the paper as firmly as he held contracts. He turned. 2 boys, still children, smiling without complete teeth, their jaws marked, their eyebrows drawn, a miniature mirror of himself. The world tightened. The blood drained from his face. The clock in the hall struck once, as if marking the pause in the air. He stood, still, his back to the cleaning lady, the photo clutched between his thumb and forefinger. The hallway suddenly seemed too long, the frames distant, the sound of his own pulse loud. A faint buzzing, memory or panic passed through his ears. His throat closed, the fitted suit now feeling short. For a second there was no agenda, no meeting, no deadlines, just those 2 faces, identical to the one he saw in the mirror. "Sir, is everything okay?" Abik's voice came small, cautious, breaking the silence. "I'm sorry. I dropped the photo of my children. I always carry it with me." The word children made something snap inside him. Obi turned reflexively, as if returning from a distant place. Her gaze met his, and they both froze. Time pulled an invisible thread of years back. The eyes, the curve of the mouth, the restrained posture. It was impossible to mistake. The name came before the thought. "He reported." She swallowed hard. A tear escaped, discreet, without a hiccup. She reached out, a trembling hand, and gently removed the photograph from his fingers, as if recovering a piece of herself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, holding her breath to keep from collapsing there, in the middle of the alien hallway. "Obi," he said softly, almost only with his lips. The air grew heavier. All around, footsteps stopped, half-open doors froze, curious eyes peering through them. The cook, in the background, paused with his ladle in the air. The housekeeper, appearing around the corner, took a step back as if she'd seen a bolt of lightning. The millionaire executioner didn't look like himself. There was something human, almost wounded, in his previously unwavering face. A bike clutched the photo to her chest, turned abruptly, and left the pantry in quick steps. She passed the pantry, the short hallway that led to the laundry area, following the path she'd known since 2 days at home. Her heart was pounding in her throat, her vision a little blurry. She needed to breathe. She needed to keep from falling. "A bike!" His voice was firm but hoarse. It wasn't an order. It was a call. The employees parted ways, uncomprehending. The sound of his leather soles echoed on the marble, distinct from the light sound of her sandals. A tray trembled in an assistant's hand. A glass clinked. The walls heard the impossible rumble of that restrained pursuit. The boss chasing the new cleaner, the entire house holding its breath. In the narrow passage before the laundry room, she hesitated for a second, long enough to feel him approaching. His perfume, subtle, dry, mingled with the soapy, metallic smell of the drains. She pressed her palm against the cold wall, as if searching for a balance. He stopped 2 steps away, hands empty, his chest rising and falling, controlled by habit, not calm. No one spoke for a few moments. The kitchen clock struck the minute with a click that seemed too loud. The noise of the exhaust fan created a wind trail between them. A bike clutched. The photograph inside her apron, as if she could shield it from the world. Obi blinked slowly once, twice, trying to organize the fibers of reality. The millionaire opened his mouth, closed it, but no sound came. His face, once composed, now bore the crack of a mask that had crumbled. Behind him, in the shadow of the doorway, curious faces disappeared like moths when someone turns on a light. The house, which had moved to the rhythm of fear, stopped. And in that interval, the man who didn't forgive mistakes was left alone, faced with a crumpled photograph and a past that, without asking permission, had just crossed the hallway. Can you believe a past love can return like that, out of nowhere, and change everything? Write, "I believe," in the comments, if your heart also raced at that scene. "How can this be?" Obi repeated, pacing back and forth in the office, his hands clasped behind his back. The leather of his shoes marked short steps on the carpet. The wall clock ticked away in seconds that seemed to stretch. The photograph of the 2 boys returned like a blow to the stomach every time he blinked. Pale, he breathed deeply and couldn't find enough air. How? In the servants' quarters, Abik hurriedly changed her uniform, the collar snagging on her tied-up hair. Her hands trembled as she pulled on her blouse, and the tears, held back for years, came shallow, hot. The memory pierced her like a blade. The schoolyard, his smile, his whispered promise. "I'll be back. I'll take care of it." And life, unforgiving of distractions, swept everything away. It was after he left that she discovered she was pregnant. Twins. Without a father, without a mother, her own had died in a cruel interval. She was left to learn to survive. 2 makeshift cribs, feverish nights, waiting in line at the health center before dawn, odd jobs in other people's homes, pots that yielded more broth than food. 15 years fit on her shoulders, and she never asked anyone for anything. Now, faced with the abyss opened by an unthinkable encounter, Abik made a simple decision. Leave, grab her bag, the photo, her dignity, and go. She opened the bedroom door and ran down the hallway, like someone fleeing an invisible fire. I wouldn't stay there another minute, even if it cost me my job. She ran into Obi as she left the pantry. He was waiting, his expression somewhere between surprise and confusion. The face she knew from another life. Their hearts raced to an ancient beat. "What do you want?" Her voice was low and firm. "I'm leaving now. You don't owe me anything." He held her gaze, the same penetrating gaze from so many years ago, only now without the armor that had made him feared. He opened his mouth, closed it, and breathed. "I need to talk to you. Alone. There's nothing to say." Abik shook his head. "You're where you always wanted to be. I won't get in the way of that again." He took a step forward. She took a half step back. The air grew thick. The housekeeper appeared around the corner of the hallway, a worried reflection of everyone's whispers. "Is everything okay, sir?" "Yes, thank you," Obi replied, without taking his eyes off Abik. When they were alone again, he lowered his voice, almost a plea. "Please, just hear me out, even if it's for the last time." There was a silence that lasted more than a minute. Abik blinked slowly, holding back tears. Then she nodded with a tiny gesture. They left through the side entrance, crossing the manicured garden like a drawing. The security guard opened the gate without question. The staff pretended not to see. Inside the SUV, the cool leather of the seat contrasted with their burning hands. The engine revved. The air conditioning blew a scentless breeze. The city outside remained the same. Horns honking, motorcycles weaving, vendors on the corner. Inside, everything was different. The road seemed longer than the map. Over the bridge, the Lagos sun broke in streaks across the hood. Obi gripped the steering wheel too tightly. He opened his mouth twice, then gave up both times. The silence was oppressive, as if any word could disorganize the little ground beneath his feet. Abik held the bag close to his chest, the corner of the picture marking the fabric inside. Through the window, he watched the marquees slowly pass by, and each one brought a memory. The lightless night, the smell of kerosene, the boys' laughter as the rain pounded the roof. At the traffic light, he adjusted his collar, an automatic gesture of someone trying to control the uncontrollable. He thought about saying sorry. He thought about asking names, ages, stories. He said nothing. The SUV moved on again, noiselessly swallowing the road's imperfections. They arrived at a luxury restaurant on Victoria Island. Valets approached with their usual choreography. One of them recognized Obi and straightened up. The smiling hostess lost her smile when she noticed the tension between them. "Private room?" Obi said shortly. They were led down a dark wooden hallway where low lights cast functional shadows. The door closed behind them with a final click. The table, impeccably linened, had 2 places. Water already served, silverware lined. Outside, the city was alive. Inside, time held its breath. A bike stood for a moment, as if unsure where to put her hands. She sat. Obi sat opposite, maintaining a distance that wasn't coldness. It was respect for the precipice between them. The ice in the glass cracked, a small sound that carried through the room. They were alone, and for the first time in 15 years, there was no audience, no corridors, no orders. Just 2 faces separated by time and a white table, breathing, searching for the first words without knowing where to begin. Will they be able to understand each other again? Comment yes, or I think it's better not. Obi took a deep breath, as if preparing a word before speaking. He looked down at the linen table, then at his hands, and when he looked up, he seemed smaller than the man in the newspapers. "I'm sorry, forgive me," he said, his voice breaking at the end. The sentence fell between them like a heavy object. The ice in the glass crackled, and the warm light of the private room cast shadows on Abike's face. She clutched her bag to her lap and shook her head, just once, slowly, as if resisting anesthesia. "Excuse me?" The whisper came out firmly. "Do you think that changes anything?" Obi swallowed. The shrewd businessman seemed to have remained outside the door. He opened his hands, closed them, and searched for words in the air. "I didn't know," he tried. "I swear I didn't know about the babies. I tried to look for you. I came back. There was no news of you. After my father died, I became responsible for everything. I had nothing to offer you." Abike kept her gaze on the edge of her plate, her eyelashes wet. The memory of the school hallway, of the "I'll be back" that never came back, ate up space. In her chest, she wanted to respond, but her body chose to cry first. The tears came silently, flowing steadily down her face, wetting the back of her hand that still held the photo, now hidden inside her bag. She took long, ragged breaths through her nose, trying to reconstruct the shape of her mouth. He reached out, hesitated for a second, and then touched hers in an almost awkward gesture. There was no grandeur, only urgency. "Since that day, I haven't loved anyone else," he said softly, as if confessing something unspeakable. "I have everything money can buy, but nothing can replace the guilt, not even missing you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid. The air conditioning hissed softly. The creaseless tablecloth seemed ironic. Abike pulled her hands back slowly, not out of anger, but to shield herself from the whirlwind. She looked at him for a moment, and in that look were years of sleepless nights, fevers soothed with wet cloths, mended shoes, a shared lunch. The watch on Obi's wrist ticked away in perfect seconds. Inside her, time was ticking by in fits and starts. "You chose your path," he said, almost silently. "I chose to survive." He opened his mouth, but the answer was choked back. The apology, repeated once more, didn't come out. Obi's control over everything was useless here. He took a deep breath, as if trying to return to his body. "I messed up," he finally managed. "I'm not asking you to erase anything. Just let me understand. Let me be." Abike's phone vibrated inside her bag, interrupting her mid-sentence. She jumped, fumbled with the clasp, and pulled out the phone with a trembling hand. On the screen, the name of the school. She answered immediately, her chair scraping lightly against the floor. "Hello?" The voice on the other end came hurriedly, institutionally, but with a care that set off alarm bells. Abike shifted in her chair, leaning forward, her free hand already gripping the back. "What do you mean? He had an accident?" His voice rose a half-tone, not out of loss of control, but out of urgency. "Where is my son now?" Obi straightened instinctively. His eyes searched hers, trying to hear from her face what the caller was saying. Abike rested her elbow on the table, her other hand on her chest, as if holding her own heart to keep it from falling out. "Is he conscious?" he asked, his jaw already trembling. He listened in silence, chewing on every word the person on the other end said. I get it, I'm going now." He hung up without looking at the screen and stood motionless for a second, the phone between his fingers. The noise of the world returned. Silverware in another room, a footstep in the hallway, a car braking outside. He pushed back his chair and stood up so quickly that his napkin slipped to the floor. "I have to go," she said, more to herself than to him. Her pupils were dilated, her breathing shallow, her entire body turned toward the door. Obi tried to say, "I'll go with you," but bit back the sentence. His instinct for command gave way to something simpler, being there, available. His hands, which had previously signed checks and resignations, now didn't know where to rest. He simply stood up, his face pale, his eyes fixed on her, alert to every gesture. Abike put away her phone, clutching her purse to her chest as a shield. Her world, already rocking since early morning, had taken another turn. There was no more room for the past, for explanations, for guilt. There was only urgency. Obi didn't think twice. He raised his keys, grabbed the door, and in a tone that mixed command and fear, simply said, "I'll take you. Now." The SUV cut through Lagos like an arrow, sirens in the distance, lights bursting against the glass, and in their chests the same unnamed question. Abike was silent, but clutched the photo in his pocket. Obi drove with his fingers white on the steering wheel, haunted by the boy's eyes, so much like his own. And when the door to the hospital ward finally opened, the doctor looked at Abike, frowned, and said, "We need to talk about what your son's scan revealed."